There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Matthew. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store.
And so now this next story is about this woman, and she has an alabaster flask, and she's pouring out this perfumed oil on Jesus' head. Well, we know because of John's gospel that this is Mary. So this is Lazarus and Martha's sister. And we're also told from John's gospel that this flask of oil was worth about a year's wages, because they said it was worth about 300 denarii. And so these little flasks of oil, they were often bought as investments, and they were always saved for something very special. So you might use it for something like your wedding day. And back at this time, women, they weren't allowed to wear jewelry on the Sabbath because that would break the law. That would be carrying a burden. But they were allowed to wear these little flasks of oil around their neck because they weren't considered a burden, because it was such an extravagant luxury. And so now after Mary and her worshiping the Lord, and she's poured out this oil on Jesus' head, then we hear about all this complaining going on by the disciples of how this is such a waste. And it seems here that Jesus isn't immediately aware of it. So I believe that this is not happening in his presence. It might be happening somewhere like in the kitchen, because they probably wouldn't think Jesus would approve of what they're doing. Because if he had thought it was a waste, he would have addressed it when it was happening, but he didn't say a word about it. And that's because Jesus always has a different outlook than the disciples. And he didn't see Mary as doing anything wrong. And we know from John's gospel that it was also Judas Iscariot that was leading the charges against Mary, that it was wasteful and that it could have been sold for the poor. But we're also told in John that Judas was a thief and that he didn't care for the poor. He didn't care anything about them. That all he wanted to do was to get his hands on money, because he kept the purse, which meant he was the treasurer. And so now Jesus, when he's aware of what they're saying, he defends Mary, and he tells them that she's done a good work, and that if the poor was really their concern, that they could always do something for them, because they'll always be poor, but there's not much time to do anything for me. And so now I think about Mary and about her being in the kitchen, and she's being harassed by all these men. And they're all sitting around basically calling her a foolish woman, where she may have even doubted herself and feeling like she's a fool for what she did. And a lot of times we will have a soft heart for someone because we will see a need in someone's life, and it'll cost us a lot to meet their need, but we end up doing it out of love for them. Many people will come to us and they'll say, well, you're wasting your time and you're wasting your money on that person. Well, it doesn't mean that the Lord necessarily sees it the same way as your accusers do, because money is never the measure of what's right or wrong. And so we see here with Mary that she had so much more spiritual insight than even the disciples had. Now, we've only seen Mary 3 times in the Bible, and every time we see her, she's been sitting at the feet of Jesus, and she's been learning. And so she's been listening, and she believes the things that Jesus says. There's only one time that Mary ever doubted Jesus, and that was within the last couple weeks when she said to Jesus, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. But after Jesus raised her brother Lazarus from the dead, she never doubted him again. But Mary, she's always been misunderstood, because you have to remember, she was misunderstood when she was with Martha and they were serving the dinner. And that was the first time we ever saw Mary in the scriptures. And then the second time we saw her, she was misunderstood when she left the house to go see Jesus, and all the people followed her, thought she was going to go mourn. And now she's misunderstood here when she pours out the most valuable thing she owns, and she anoints Jesus in worship. So the point here is that spiritual Christians can be misunderstood even by other Christians. We don't all see things the same way. And if you are going to follow Jesus, you can expect that you're going to be misunderstood. But this Mary, she had been listening at Jesus' feet. And she believed the things that she heard. So she understood that he was going to die and that he was going to be crucified. And she also believed that Jesus would be resurrected like her brother Lazarus was, because he had just died and he was resurrected. And Mary here, she may have been the only one who really believed all this, because she's the only one we see who actually acts on what she believes. And Jesus, he goes and he confirms that Mary understood, because he said, she put this oil on my body for my burial. And if she had not acted on that right away, and she didn't do it right then at the present, there would have never been another opportunity. She would have missed the only opportunity to show Jesus while he was there on earth how much she loved him and how much she worshiped him. And there is something about taking the time now, while we're here on this earth, even in our fallen human conditions, to offer to Jesus our most valuable things to him in worship. Because if we won't do this now, we will never have this opportunity again after he comes for us and after we leave this world, or else after we die. And we will have missed that opportunity to tell him how much we love him and how much we believe in him. And it doesn't matter if everybody else calls us foolish. And so this alabaster flask, they would have had a long tapered neck on the bottle. And so it's this long bottle, and it's without handles. And to open this bottle, you'd have to break the end of the neck off of the bottle. And once you opened it, it could never be sealed again. So the value of the investment would be lost immediately on opening. And Mary here, she just didn't use a little on him. She just didn't try to make him smell good. And she didn't put any of it on herself or on anybody else in the house. She didn't even use this at Lazarus's burial. And she pours all of this on Jesus's head, the whole bottle of oil. And so now it's running down over Jesus's body, and the whole room was filled with the fragrance that came from Jesus. And so when that happened and that fragrance was there, everybody in the room could enjoy it. And it's the same way as everybody here, we can always enjoy the presence of Jesus. And this fragrance that was on Jesus, it would have lasted past his burial. So that means now he has this fragrance on him, and he would be wearing it to the Passover meal when he spent it with the disciples. At the Passover, everybody could smell Jesus. And then in the garden, when Jesus was praying, and at his betrayal by Judas and all the Roman soldiers, when they came to take him away, they could still smell him. And he smelled that way all through his court trials at the Sanhedrin, and then before Pilate and with Herod. And when they pierced his hands and when they pierced his feet, they could smell that oil. And Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, when they took his body down and they wrapped him in the cloths, they also could smell it. They could smell what Mary did. All right. So now the next thing that we read after this is that we read that Judas has gone to the chief priests. And Judas is asking them, what will they give him to deliver Jesus? So Judas here, he sought them out. And you kind of wonder if it's because Jesus had just called him out in front of everybody over that ordeal with Mary and the perfume. And so maybe Judas felt that Jesus made him look foolish and being rebuked in front of everybody else. Or maybe it's because he can't steal the money from the sale of the perfume, so he's going to take whatever he can get. Or maybe he thinks he's pretty much going to get caught as a thief, and so he ought to try to plan his exit. We don't know what was going through Judas's mind, and I don't think we really want to know what's going through his mind. But one thing we know about Judas is that Judas was covetous and that he liked money, and that money was his real master. And Judas here, he had never given his heart to Jesus. So in one sense, Judas, he is a believer because he's just like the other 11. He was given the power to heal. He was given the power to cast out demons. He heard all the sermons. He saw all the people raised from the dead. He was at the feeding of the 5,000, and he even saw Jesus walk on water. So in one sense, Judas did believe, but he never surrendered his life to Jesus. Judas was his own master. He never really bowed to anyone but himself. And the only reason he would bow before others was the purpose of deception. And nobody knew any of this about Judas except for Judas and except for Jesus. And so you must think that those priests must have thought how lucky they were that they just had this meeting like the day before, and they're plotting to take Jesus. And now one of his close disciples, he comes to them to betray him. And Judas, he only received 30 pieces of silver, which was the price of a slave. But I would imagine that these guys would have paid just about anything to capture Jesus. But it was prophesied that Jesus would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. So it wasn't 31 pieces of silver, and it wasn't 29 pieces. It was 30, because this is prophesied in Zechariah 11:12. And so now it's Thursday, and it's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And now the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it lasts for 7 days, and it always starts the day before Passover. And so Passover, it would be starting that evening at sundown. Now Jesus, his disciples, they come to him and they ask him, well, where do you want us to prepare the Passover meal? And we know from the other Gospels that the disciples were to follow this man carrying a water pot and to ask him where to prepare the meal. And to them, that would have been very odd because it was the women in the culture that got the water, and so it was the women that carried the water pots. So to see a man carrying a water pot would have stuck out to them. And we know from Luke's gospel that the two disciples that were sent to prepare the meal, well, that was Peter and John. And it's believed that the room that they actually prepared the Passover belonged to John Mark's mother. And John Mark, he's also known as Mark, and he was the writer of the Gospel of Mark. And so now they're sitting up there, and as they're eating the Passover dinner, Jesus, he told his disciples that it was going to be one of them that would betray him. And nobody jumped up and said, it's Judas. I know it. His eyes are kind of beady. Wasn't like that. In fact, all these guys, they were shocked because this is the first time they've ever heard this. And they couldn't believe it would be one of them.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.